Jebediah Brown, a character from the old Ether timeline, but I think has returned in the story of Black Ops 7 Zombies. And the role he's about to play in this story, I believe, could completely change everything, explaining things as easy as why the OG Pack-Lunch machine is back in Astra Malorum, but things as big as why the Warden is really and truly as powerful as he is. And trust me, you're going to like this video. And if that's true, you guys do enjoy this video, I'd appreciate if you guys could support the video in any way, shape, or form. Drop a like, subscribe, bell, share, or especially leave a comment, because I love reading through story comments all the time. But with that said, let's talk about the story of Jebediah Brown and his role in Black Ops 7 Zombies. Now, I want to tell you the backstory of Jebediah Brown, even though the story I'm going to tell you has to do with the original timeline, and things are probably different now in Black Ops 7 and the Dark Ether timeline, but I still think it is important, and I'll go over it as fast as I can. But to understand the story of Jebediah Brown, you have to understand that he was from a long time ago. In fact, he was born in 1845 to a single mother named Mrs. Brown. But when Jebediah turned 10, she decided that they were going to move to a frontier mining town named Purgatory Point. Now, interestingly enough, when they move to this mining town, Jebediah doesn't become a miner like a lot of other people in this town. Instead, he becomes a blacksmith. But as those people are mining in his town, they find something they weren't looking for. And they find something that Jebediah calls the Blue Rock. But this Blue Rock has a negative effect on so many of these miners. And so many of them, after coming back from the mine and being exposed to this Blue Rock, come back insane, mad, and violent. And unfortunately, this would affect Jebediah in the worst possible way. Because his neighbor, Old Bill, who used to be super nice, he says, one day just breaks into their house and ends up killing Jebediah's mother. And with the death of his mother, Jebediah looks for answers, and he wants to learn more about this Blue Rock that changed his neighbor into the violent person he became. And that's when he first ventures into the mine. Now, interestingly enough, when Jebediah is exposed to this Blue Rock, he doesn't go insane like so many other people. Instead, he starts to see visions of what he believes to be angels. Now, this would later be revealed that these are actually keepers, but he thought they were angels, and then I'll refer to them as that just for Jebediah's sake. But he starts to see different visions, and in one vision, the angels tell him that he has to prepare for what's coming. They don't tell him what's coming, but he has to build something of great power. And eventually, with his blacksmithing skills and the guidance of these angels, he builds something that he says packs a serious punch. And yes, if you guys didn't know, Jebediah Brown is the original creator of the Pack-a-Punch machine. Now, that's significant on its own, but his story does continue, and I want to finish it off, because after he builds this Pack-a-Punch machine, he does kind of something a bit funny, and he digs up the dead body of his mother and puts her into the Pack-a-Punch machine. And unfortunately for him, she doesn't come out of the Pack-a-Punch machine. But then it starts to get a bit weird, because he starts to see visions of his mother in his house, except now she looks a bit younger than when she died. But regardless though, the angels appear to Jebediah again, and they tell him to build something else. And what they have him build turns out to be the Agarthan device. Now keep in mind, the Agarthan device is a very powerful thing. In fact, this was used in the final map of the Ether timeline by Nikolai to end the multiverse and banish all corruption into the Dark Ether. Now, it didn't do it alone, because it required the blood of the Apothecarian Elder God, Elemental Shard, and Summoning Key, which Jebediah couldn't get even though the Keepers wanted him to. But at the end of the day, it's still a very, very powerful device. But then as time goes on in this town, more and more people that were exposed to this Blue Rock start to go insane, become delusional, paranoid, and especially violent. And Jebediah rightfully blames the Blue Rock, which at this point I think we could all figure out was Element 115. But this is when the angels appear to Jebediah for the final time, and they tell him to do one last thing, and that was put the Agarthan device in the Pack-a-Punch machine. And this would be the last mistake Jebediah would ever make for his town, because when he does that, he teleports his whole town of Purgatory Point beneath the surface of Angola. This starts a zombie outbreak, and it seems like everybody in that town eventually died. And that's the story of Jebediah Brown. But there's something that I was being a bit vague about, and that's exactly what Purgatory Point is. Now, for the people who know, you know where this is, but for the people who don't, Purgatory Point is an old frontier town that has a mansion where a younger version of his mother just randomly appears and is eventually transported beneath the surface of Angola. Yes, Purgatory Point is actually buried. That is where Jebediah Brown is from. This is where the Pack-a-Punch machine was built. This is where the Argarthan device was built. And this is exactly why we see in the mansion Jebediah's mother in ghost form. And that is the story of not only Jebediah Brown, but also the Pack-a-Punch machine and Buried. And these are all very, very significant. And I think people are really overlooking this because I think this is really going to explain a lot of things. Now, first off, I think this is significant because we've already seen that in Astra Malorum, the OG Pack-a-Punch machine is back, which is weird because the Pack-a-Punch machine has always been in the Dark Aether timeline. In fact, it looked a little bit like the OG Pack-a-Punch machine. But the story of it was that, sure, at one point this was the original Pack-a-Punch machine, but over time it got modified and it looks a bit different. But it was still the one that the original Jebediah Brown that we just talked about built. But now we're seeing it return to its original form. But the question is, why? And the reason I think that it just might be the case is because there's a new version of Jebediah Brown in this timeline, and he may have built the same exact Pack-a-Punch that another version from the original timeline also did. But why am I so sure that there's another version of Jebediah Brown? Well, the reason why is, where was Jebediah Brown from? He was from Buried, Purgatory Point, right? But what did we see in Ashes the Damned, the main hub of the map? We see somewhere called Ashwood. Now this is also an old frontier town, but you don't see any areas that are one-to-one from Buried, so some people were even doubting if this was Buried. But I am most definitely sure that this is actually at least a different version of Buried. Because not only does this area look like Buried, but also if you look at the theme song of this map, the theme song is called Buried in Ashwood. But if that still wasn't enough for you, there is literally a radio from someone who used to be from this town that mentions a Jeb was from this town. And I mean, come on. How many characters could be known as Jeb? Unless they're introducing a new character to throw us off, I think that this is more than likely suggesting that Jebediah Brown, at least a new version of him, was from Ashwood in this alternate Buried. And to me, it just all makes sense. Now, his story would have to be maybe a little bit different, or maybe it could be the same. I'm not entirely sure. But considering that we do have Jebediah in this old western town, he could have rebuilt the Pack-a-Punch machine, and now we're seeing it again on Astra Malorum. But I left something out again, and I keep doing it to you in this video, but trust me, it's worth it, because I did mention there's a radio mentioning someone named Jeb. But there's more to that radio, and I want to play that for you right now.
Ashwood weren't no garrison town. It's just a bunch of hayseeds, church folk. We was using it to marshal our forces, near 8,000 head of horse, split between battery and cavalry, and all about set to march against the northern aggressors. Now, this was the start of 65. The writing was on the wall. Jeb was dead. We're taking a real beating at Franklin.
So yeah, I may have not mentioned the person that was from Ashwood that mentioned Jeb. That was actually the Warden. The one who has taken the souls of our playable characters and trapped us down here. Who seemingly controls the Dark Aether. Yeah, that guy was also from Ashwood and knew Jeb. Now, if you want to know the full story of what we know so far about the Warden, I'll link this video on screen now. You guys could check that out. But I think that there's more being revealed through his tie-in with Jebediah Brown. Because another thing we heard about this version of Jebediah Brown is that he died, because he said Jeb is already dead. And I think that is very, very significant, because I think this could finally give us some sort of start of an explanation for how the Warden became as powerful as he was. Because if you guys watch my video on the story of the Warden, you would know that he was just a regular guy from Ashwood. He wasn't all that powerful. In fact, his whole town despised him. They called him a deserter. So this isn't someone of great power. Yet somehow, not only did he enter into the Dark Aether, but on top of that, he became as powerful that he was able to subdue Shadowsmiths that we already heard have always been in the Dark Aether, have been weavers of the Dark Aether. Like, those are some pretty powerful things. But how did he become as powerful to do that? And I think that his ties to Jebediah Brown may finally give us somewhat of an answer. Because if he really and truly knew Jebediah Brown, and the Jebediah Brown from this timeline also was able to build the Pack-Punch machine and potentially something else of power, that could maybe explain it. Because think about it, if this version of Jebediah built the Pack-Punch machine also, did he also build something like the Agarthan device? Maybe not exactly the Agarthan device, but maybe something like it. But on top of that, wouldn't this also explain why the North came to this seemingly small town that even the Warden says is just a bunch of churchgoers? Why did they go after this town? Well, what did we hear about Jebediah in his story? After he built the Pack-Punch machine, people were traveling so far to upgrade their weaponry. And what if the North knew about it and that's why they wanted this town? For the Pack-Punch machine. But keep in mind that this version of Jebediah died, and maybe this explains why this version of Buried never became buried. It was never beneath the surface of Angola because he died before he could put the Agarthan device into the Pack-Punch machine, teleporting it underground. And if he dies and does this, maybe this is where the Warden steps in and finds whatever he built, whether it's the Agarthan device or something else of power. And this may be our first hint on how exactly not only the Warden entered into the Dark Ether, but on top of that, was able to subdue the Shadowsmiths and gain the power that he does. What if this version of Jebediah Brown built something like the Agarthan device, and when he died, he left it there, but that is when the Warden found it. And now that, whatever it is, as powerful as it may be, that is what he is using not only to enter into the Dark Ether, but to subdue the Shadowsmiths and gain domain over the Dark Ether. And maybe this is even why he needs souls. Maybe souls is what power whatever this device is. How cool of a turn would that be? I mean, why else would he just offhandedly just mention that Jeb is dead? Why would he do that? And to me, I think this may be the answer to what we're looking for and explain what's really going on with the Warden. But of course, we'll always have to just wait and see. As exciting as this all is, it's just a theory at this point, but I really hope we're right with this one because my gosh, would this be so cool. But regardless though, with story videos like this, I love hearing your guys' inputs and thoughts on everything that I mentioned in this video. So make sure to head down to the comment section, maybe expand on this theory more, or maybe I made a mistake and you guys can point that out too. Regardless, I love all discussion story in the comment section. I read through them all the time. But regardless though, that's going to wrap it up for me. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.